The sky was dark and heavy with smoke. The faint hum of alien machinery vibrated through the ground beneath Ryan's boots. He crouched behind a large metallic container, his hand resting lightly on the handle of his plasma pistol. Through the dim light of the camp's electric barriers, he could see them. The Syndicate guards. Tall, armored figures with glowing red visors, moving in synchronized patterns as they herded the prisoners. Chains clinked, and the occasional sound of a whip striking flesh echoed through the cold night. Ryan's jaw tightened. He hated this place. The slave camp was enormous, surrounded by high electric walls and patrolled by Syndicate drones. Towering metal pillars loomed overhead, casting long shadows across the rows of trembling prisoners. They were of different species, some humanoid, others more alien-looking. All of them were malnourished and broken, their eyes hollow. Ryan had seen his share of Hellvoles before, but this was different. This was evil. His mission was clear: reconnaissance only. The human fleet needed intel on Syndicate defenses, not another dead hero. But then he saw her. A young alien girl was being dragged across the yard by 2 Syndicate guards. Her silver hair was tangled and matted with blood. Her skin was pale blue, and deep bruises covered her arms and legs. The tattered remains of what might have once been a dress barely clung to her thin frame. Her wrists were shackled, and the chains clinked as the guards pulled her toward the center of the camp. Ryan's heart hammered in his chest. He activated the cloaking device on his suit, feeling the soft hum of the technology as his body blurred into the shadows. Slowly, carefully, he followed. The girl stumbled, falling to her knees as one of the guards yanked the chain. She didn't cry out. She just stared at the ground, her body limp. "Get up," one of the guards hissed in a guttural voice. When she didn't move fast enough, the guard raised his electric whip. Ryan's fists clenched. His pulse roared in his ears as the whip cracked down on her back. The girl's body arched in pain, but she made no sound. Another strike. Then another. The guards were laughing. Ryan's vision narrowed. He heard the voice of his commanding officer in his head. "Stay out of sight, Captain. Don't engage." "Screw that." His hand shot to his pistol. He thumbed the safety off. The guard raised his whip again. Ryan's pistol hummed, and a searing plasma bolt shot through the air. The guard's head exploded in a burst of blue light. The second guard turned, eyes widening beneath his helmet. "What the?" Ryan fired again. The guard collapsed in a heap of smoldering metal and flesh. Alarms blared. Spotlights turned toward him, cutting through the darkness. Drones whirred to life, and the sound of heavy boots echoed from the metal walkways above. Ryan sprinted toward the girl, crouching beside her. Her eyes fluttered open, pale violet, wide with fear. "Can you stand?" Ryan's voice was rough, but not unkind. She stared at him for a moment, confused. Then she shook her head. Ryan scooped her up in his arms. She was light, barely more than skin and bone. "Hold on," he said. The girl's thin arms wrapped weakly around his neck as he sprinted toward the perimeter. Guards dropped from the walkways above, opening fire. Plasma bolts seared the air around him. His suit's shielding system flared, deflecting the first few shots. He twisted his body to shield the girl as he ducked into a narrow passage between 2 metal storage units. "Echo, where the hell are you?" The AI's voice clicked into his earpiece. "Captain, you've triggered the base's defense grid. Extraction window is closing." "No kidding," Ryan growled. A plasma blast struck the wall beside him, sending sparks flying. He turned sharply down another corridor. The girl was trembling in his arms. "Echo, route to the evac point. Now." "On it." Ryan ducked as a drone buzzed overhead, firing a rapid burst of energy. He slid beneath it, rolled, and fired upwards. The drone exploded in a burst of red and black shrapnel. He could hear the guards closing in. They were shouting orders in their alien tongue. He glanced down at the girl. "Stay with me," he whispered. Her violet eyes met his, wide and glassy. He didn't know why he cared so much. He was a soldier. He'd seen people die before, but there was something about her. A guard appeared at the end of the corridor, leveling a heavy plasma rifle. Ryan dropped to one knee and fired. The plasma bolt struck the guard's chest, sending him crashing backward into the wall. Ryan's heart hammered as his targeting visor flashed red. Multiple contacts approaching from the west. Ryan reached the end of the corridor and slammed his fist against a control panel. The metal door slid open, revealing a dimly lit loading bay. His ship sat at the far end, a sleek, black interceptor with human markings. Guards flooded the loading bay from both sides. Ryan bolted toward the ship. His boots pounded against the steel floor as plasma bolts scorched the air around him. The girl's breathing was shallow. "Open the ramp," Ryan shouted. Opening. The ship's loading ramp hissed as it descended. Ryan sprinted up the incline just as the guards opened fire. Bullets and plasma fire struck the hull behind him. He leaped inside as the ramp sealed shut. The ship's engines roared to life. Launching in 3, 2, 1. The ship rocketed out of the loading bay. Ryan stumbled to the cockpit, setting the girl down gently in the co-pilot's seat. She was barely conscious. Blood trickled down the side of her face. He brushed a lock of silver hair away from her eyes. "Stay with me," he said softly. She opened her eyes halfway. Her lips parted as though she was trying to speak. A single word escaped her mouth. "Why?" Ryan exhaled slowly. His hands tightened on the controls. He saw the syndicate ships in the distance, dark, menacing shapes with glowing red lights. His ship's targeting systems locked onto them. Because, Ryan's jaw set, it was the right thing to do. The syndicate ships began to close in. Echo's voice clicked into his ear. "Captain, syndicate fleet is pursuing." "Orders." Ryan's eyes hardened. His finger hovered over the throttle. "Let them come." The girl's hand brushed against his. Her violet eyes locked onto his. And for the first time since the war began, Ryan felt something shift inside him. A reason to fight. Ryan's hands gripped the ship's controls as the sleek black interceptor shot through the dark void of space. Red warning lights flashed across the console. Syndicate ships were closing in fast. The girl sat in the co-pilot's seat, still trembling, her pale violet eyes wide and fearful. Her silver hair was tangled and matted with blood, and her breathing was shallow. Ryan's jaw tightened. He had seen countless battlefields, witnessed soldiers die in front of him. But this girl, there was something different about her. He wasn't sure why he cared so much. "Echo, status report." Ryan barked. "Syndicate pursuit ships closing in, Captain." Echo's calm voice replied in his ear. 6 signatures, 5 fighters, 1 heavy cruiser. Ryan's eyes narrowed. How long until they're in firing range? 15 seconds. Ryan's fingers danced over the controls, rerouting power to the ship's shields and weapons. "Bring up the targeting systems." "Captain, we're outgunned and outnumbered," Echo reminded him. The logical action would be retreat. Ryan's lips curled into a grim smile. "Logic's never really been my thing." The ship's targeting reticle flashed red as the syndicate ships closed in. Plasma bolts shot through the darkness, streaking toward them like fiery lances. Ryan's ship spun hard to the left, the inertial dampeners whining as the gravity shifted. The girl's hands tightened on the armrests, her breath hitching. "Hang on," Ryan growled. He rolled the ship hard, diving beneath a hail of plasma fire. One of the syndicate fighters followed him, matching his moves. Ryan's hands moved with precision and speed, fingers flicking across the controls. He banked hard to the right, then cut the thrusters, letting the pursuing fighter overshoot him. "Gotcha." Ryan squeezed the trigger. A burst of plasma fire shot from the ship's cannons, striking the syndicate fighter's engine. The ship exploded in a flash of blue and white light. "Nice shot, Captain." Ryan didn't have time to celebrate. More plasma fire streaked toward them from the remaining fighters. The interceptor rocked violently as one shot struck the shields. Sparks flew from the console. Shields down to 60%. Echo's voice warned. Ryan gritted his teeth. Echo, deploy countermeasures. Small metal pods shot from the sides of the ship, releasing bursts of electromagnetic interference. The Syndicate targeting systems faltered, and Ryan used the opening to roll beneath another fighter, firing upward. Another explosion rocked the darkness. 2 down. Ryan's eyes flicked toward the girl. You okay? She nodded slowly, her eyes filled with uncertainty. Ryan could see the bruises on her wrists where the shackles had bitten into her skin. His chest tightened. Captain, the heavy cruiser is charging weapons, Echo reported. Ryan's eyes narrowed. The heavy cruiser loomed in the distance, its massive hull lined with plasma cannons. Red energy gathered at the ship's core, preparing to fire. Echo, give me a firing solution. Direct assault is inadvisable. I didn't ask for your opinion. Ryan shouted. Give me a firing solution. Understood. The targeting reticle flashed red over the cruiser's exposed power core. Ryan's finger hovered over the trigger. The girl's hand brushed against his. Wait, she whispered. Ryan's eyes snapped toward her. Wait. That thing's about to vaporize us. Her violet eyes were intense. Target the reactor core. Ryan frowned. That's suicide. We'd be caught in the blast. Trust me, she said softly. Ryan hesitated for a moment, then hit the throttle. Echo, lock onto the reactor core. Locking. Target acquired. Ryan spun the ship toward the cruiser, flying low to avoid the turret fire. Red beams of plasma shot past them, one grazing the side of the ship. The hull screamed under the stress. Ryan's eyes narrowed. Firing. A concentrated plasma burst shot from the ship's nose cannons, streaking toward the reactor core. The shot struck home. The reactor's containment field flickered and failed. The ship's hull began to glow as the core destabilized. Ryan's hand slammed down on the throttle. Get us out of here, Echo. Engaging hyperdrive. The interceptor surged forward as the heavy cruiser erupted in a massive explosion. White and blue fires spread through the void, consuming the surrounding debris. The shockwave caught the edge of Ryan's ship, sending it into a wild spin. Shields failing. Echo's voice warned. Ryan fought the controls, his arms straining. The ship steadied as they shot into hyperspace, leaving the wreckage of the cruiser behind. Ryan exhaled slowly, his hands shaking. He turned toward the girl. That was a hell of a gamble, he said. Her eyes were half closed. It worked. Ryan stood and crossed the small cockpit toward her. He knelt beside her seat. Her breathing was shallow, and her skin was pale. His hand brushed her silver hair away from her face. You're hurt. I'm fine, she whispered. You're not fine. Ryan pulled a small medical kit from his side pouch and activated the nanite injector. He pressed it gently against her arm. The device hissed as microscopic healing agents entered her bloodstream. Her eyes fluttered open. Why? Why did you save me? Ryan's gaze darkened. Because no one deserves what they did to you. Her eyes softened. Her hand brushed against his wrist. Her fingers were cold. My name is Elira, she said softly. Ryan. His voice was quiet. Captain Ryan Hunter. Thank you, Ryan Hunter. Her eyes drifted closed. Ryan's jaw tightened. He stood and turned back toward the console. Echo's voice clicked into his ear. Captain, Syndicate reinforcements have been deployed. How long until they catch up? 4 hours. Ryan's hands tightened on the controls. Find me a safe harbor. There is an uninhabited moon in Sector 9. No Syndicate activity detected. Set a course. Captain. Echo's voice lowered slightly. This is dangerous. Ryan glanced toward Elira. Her fragile frame looked so small in the co-pilot's seat. Yeah, Ryan said quietly, but she's worth it. The ship's engines hummed as it sped through hyperspace. Ryan leaned back in his seat, his eyes never leaving Elira. He didn't know what the Syndicate wanted from her, but he knew one thing. Whatever they were after, they were not getting her back. Ryan sat in the dimly lit cockpit, the glow of the instrument panels casting sharp shadows across his face. Elira lay on the small cot at the back of the ship, her breathing steady but shallow. Ryan's gaze remained fixed on the star-filled void outside the viewport. His mind was racing. They had narrowly escaped the Syndicate's trap, but that didn't mean they were safe. Far from it. Echo's voice clicked into his ear. "Captain, we have arrived at the designated moon. Atmosphere is breathable. No active Syndicate signals detected." Ryan exhaled. "Good. Take us down." The ship's engines hummed as the vessel descended toward the moon's rocky surface. Through the viewport, Ryan saw jagged cliffs and dark valleys stretching beneath them. The ship touched down on a flat outcropping of rock, the landing gear hissing as it settled into place. Ryan stood and crossed the cockpit toward Elira. Her violet eyes fluttered open as he knelt beside her. "Hey," he said softly. She managed a weak smile. "We made it. For now." Ryan brushed her silver hair away from her face. "But they're not going to stop. The Syndicate doesn't let things go." Elira's eyes darkened. "I know." Ryan's jaw tightened. He stood and began pacing the small space. "They're going to track us. That heavy cruiser was probably one of their weaker ships. They'll send more next time. Stronger. Faster." Elira sat up slowly, wincing as she pressed a hand against her ribs. "You should leave me behind." Ryan's head snapped toward her. "What?" "You heard me." Her voice was quiet. "They're after me. If you leave me here, you'll be safe." Ryan stepped toward her, his fists clenching. "Safe? You think I care about safe?" He knelt in front of her, his eyes blazing. "You think I saved you just to abandon you?" Elira's eyes widened. "But..." "No." Ryan's voice was low and dangerous. "They hurt you. I'm not letting them take you again." Her gaze softened. Her hand brushed against his wrist. "Then what do we do?" Ryan's expression hardened. "We fight back." Elira's eyes widened. "Against the Syndicate." Ryan stood and began moving toward the ship's weapons console. His fingers tapped over the holographic controls, bringing up a schematic of the Syndicate fleet. Red shapes hovered in the air, representing capital ships, heavy cruisers, and fighter squadrons. "They have numbers," Ryan said. "Firepower, technology." His jaw tightened. "But they have weaknesses." Elira slowly stood and crossed the cockpit, her eyes focused on the display. "You really think we can fight them?" "I don't know," Ryan admitted. "But I'm not going down without a fight." Echo's voice clicked in. "Captain, you are suggesting an assault on a superior enemy force with limited resources and a single ship." Ryan smiled darkly. "Sounds about right." "Illogical." "Yeah. Well, humans aren't exactly known for being logical." Elira watched him carefully. "What's the plan?" Ryan's eyes narrowed. "The Syndicate relies on Central Command. Their ships are linked through a neural network controlled by a single AI core." He zoomed in on the display, highlighting a massive structure orbiting a gas giant. "The core is located here, the Syndicate overmind." Elira's eyes widened. "That's suicide." "Probably." Ryan smiled grimly. "But if we take out the core, we sever their fleet's communication. Their ships will lose tactical coordination. It'll give the outer colonies a fighting chance." Elira shook her head. "It's too well guarded." Ryan turned toward her. "That's why we're not going in through the front door." He pointed to a thin pathway highlighted in blue on the schematic. "This is a maintenance shaft leading to the Overmind's central processing hub. If we can slip in unnoticed, we can plant an EMP charge directly on the core." Elira's brow furrowed. "That sounds possible." Ryan grinned. "Impossible is what humans do best." Echo's voice clicked in. "Captain, I must object. Your chances of success are less than 0.05%. Ryan leaned back. "Better odds than usual." Elira's gaze remained fixed on the display. "You'll need help." Ryan's smile faded. "We're not exactly in a position to recruit volunteers." Elira's eyes darkened. You saved me. I owe you my life. Ryan's expression softened. You don't owe me anything. Elira's eyes flashed. Then let me choose. Ryan studied her for a moment. The determination in her gaze, the strength beneath her fragile frame. Finally, he nodded. All right, he said. You're in. Echo's voice cut through the moment. Captain, I am detecting a syndicate patrol ship entering the system. Ryan's smile faded. They found us. Shields are still at 60%. Echo reported. Weapons systems are operational. Ryan's eyes darkened. How long until they're in range? Less than 2 minutes. Ryan turned toward Elira. We need a distraction. Elira's eyes flashed. Let me handle that. Ryan frowned. What do you mean? She stepped toward the console, her hand glowing faintly with soft blue energy. Ryan's eyes widened. What are you? Elira's fingers brushed the control panel. Sparks danced across the surface as the ship's targeting systems lit up. I was engineered for more than just breeding, Elira said softly. The syndicate tried to control me, but they failed. Ryan's mouth parted in shock. You're enhanced. Elira's eyes flashed. Let's just say they underestimated me. The ship's weapons powered up. A targeting reticle locked onto the approaching syndicate patrol ship. Ryan's hand moved toward the controls, but Elira's hand covered his. Let me. Ryan hesitated. Then he stepped back. Elira's eyes glowed with a faint blue light. Her hand moved across the console with unnatural precision. The ship's targeting systems pulsed. A burst of plasma fire shot from the ship's cannons, striking the patrol ship's engines. The vessel spun wildly as explosions erupted along its hull. Ryan's eyes widened. Damn. Elira's breathing was heavy. Told you. Ryan crossed the cockpit toward her. His hand brushed against her arm. You could have told me about that earlier. I didn't know if I could trust you. And now. Elira's eyes softened. I'm still deciding. Ryan smiled faintly. Echo, how long until syndicate reinforcements arrive? Approximately 8 hours. Ryan's smile faded. That's not long. Elira's eyes narrowed. Then we need to move. Ryan's gaze lingered on her for a moment. He could see the strength beneath her fragile frame, the fire beneath the fear. All right, Ryan said. Let's make some noise. The ship's engines hummed as Ryan plotted a course toward the syndicate's command center. Elira's hand brushed against his arm as the ship accelerated into the void. Ryan's eyes hardened. They were coming for the syndicate. And this time, they weren't holding back. Ryan sat in the cockpit, the hum of the ship's engines vibrating beneath his boots. Elira sat across from him, her eyes fixed on the holographic display of the syndicate overmind. The glowing red sphere floated in the air, surrounded by smaller orbiting symbols representing defensive turrets, patrol ships, and reinforced hull plating. It was a fortress, nearly impenetrable. We'll need to disable the outer defenses first, Ryan said, his voice low. Once the perimeter is breached, we can slip through the maintenance shaft. Elira's eyes narrowed. How close can we get without being detected? Echo's voice crackled in. With cloaking engaged, you can approach within 500 meters of the station's surface. However, the heat signature from the engines will likely be detected within 3 minutes. 3 minutes? Ryan's jaw tightened. That's not enough time. Elira's gaze hardened. We'll have to make it enough. Ryan glanced toward her. Her violet eyes were sharp, focused, a warrior's gaze. He smiled faintly. I guess we're really doing this. Elira's hand brushed against his arm. Together. Ryan's breath hitched at the warmth of her touch, but before he could speak, Echo's voice cut through the moment. Captain, incoming transmission. Ryan's head snapped toward the control panel. From who? Unknown source. Ryan hesitated, then tapped the panel. The holographic display flickered, and a shadowed figure appeared. A metallic mask obscured most of its face, but the curved horns protruding from the top of its head gave away its identity immediately. "Syndicate," Elira whispered. The figure's voice was cold and mechanical. "Captain Ryan, we have been monitoring your movements." Ryan's eyes narrowed. "Yeah. Sorry for the trouble." The figure tilted its head. "You have something we want." Ryan's hand moved toward the ship's controls, but Elira's hand covered his. "Let him speak." "You mean her," the figure said. "We allowed her to escape." Ryan's brow furrowed. "What are you talking about? Did you really think she escaped the Syndicate's grip so easily?" The figure's tone sharpened. "She was meant to find you." Ryan's eyes flashed toward Elira. Her face paled. "That's a lie." "Is it?" The figure's mask glinted in the dim light. "She was modified. Enhanced. Do you truly believe that was an accident?" Ryan's jaw clenched. "Shut up." "Ask her," the figure said. "Ask her what the price of her freedom was." Ryan's gaze locked onto Elira. Her violet eyes were wide, trembling. "Elira?" Her lips parted. Her hands shook. "Ryan, The figure's hollow laugh echoed through the cockpit. "She was implanted with a neural tracker. The moment she escaped, we knew exactly where she was going. We allowed her to find you." Ryan's chest tightened. "That's not true." Elira's hand moved toward her neck, trembling fingers brushing against the soft skin beneath her ear. "I didn't know." Her breath hitched. "I swear I didn't know." Ryan's heart hammered in his chest. "Elira." The figure's tone darkened. "The tracker is still active. Even now, our fleet is converging on your location." Ryan's blood ran cold. "Echo. 6 Syndicate warships entering the system," Echo reported. "Weapons are locked." Ryan's hand slammed against the controls. "Shields up." Elira's breath quickened. "Ryan, I swear." The ship shuddered as a plasma bolt struck the hull. The cockpit's lights dimmed. Warning sirens blared. Ryan's hand shot toward the controls, his eyes flashing toward Elira. "You set us up," Ryan growled. "No." Elira's eyes were filled with tears. "I didn't know." Ryan's teeth clenched. Another blast rocked the ship. Elira stumbled. Ryan's arms shot out, catching her before she fell. His heart was hammering in his chest. Anger, fear, and confusion boiling inside him. The figure's hollow voice returned. "You cannot outrun us. Surrender the girl, and your life will be spared." Ryan's eyes darkened. "Go to hell." He cut the transmission. Echo's voice clicked in. "Captain, the Syndicate ships are charging weapons. Impact in 15 seconds. Ryan's grip tightened on Elira's arm. "We need to cut the tracker." Her breath hitched. "It's integrated with my nervous system. If you cut it wrong." "I don't care," Ryan growled. "If we don't disable it, they'll track us forever." Elira's eyes filled with fear, but she nodded. "Do it." Ryan pulled her toward the medbay. The ship shook violently as another blast struck the hull. Sparks rained down from the ceiling. "Echo," Ryan shouted. "Keep us in the air." Echo's response was calm. "Understood." Ryan laid Elira down on the med table. His hand shook as he activated the surgical scanner. A thin blue light scanned across Elira's neck, revealing a small metallic implant buried beneath her skin. "Got it," Ryan said. He grabbed a small surgical tool. His hand hovered over the implant. "This might hurt." Elira's eyes shone with trust. "Do it." Ryan's jaw tightened. His hand steadied as the surgical tool hummed to life. He carefully inserted the tip beneath the skin. Elira's body tensed as the metal burned beneath the surface. Ryan's eyes narrowed. Almost there. The ship rocked violently. Elira screamed as the tool dug deeper into her skin. Ryan's hand pressed down. "Come on." A small spark shot out from beneath Elira's skin. The implant's signal flickered. Then, the red light on the display went dark. Echo's voice clicked in. "Tracker signal lost. Enemy ships are disengaging." Ryan's breath left him in a rush. His hands were shaking. Elira's chest rose and fell rapidly beneath his hand. He brushed her silver hair away from her face. "You okay?" he whispered. Her violet eyes fluttered open. "Ryan." He leaned closer. "It's over." Her hand touched his cheek. "You saved me." His hand covered hers. "Always." Suddenly, the ship's emergency lights flickered. Echo's voice sharpened. "Captain, I am detecting a breach in the rear hull." Ryan's eyes narrowed. "What?" Echo's voice was unnervingly calm. "They're inside." Ryan's hand shot toward his holster. He pulled out his sidearm as the sound of metal footsteps echoed down the corridor. "Stay here," he said. Elira's eyes widened. "Ryan." "I'll handle it." Ryan's hand tightened around the grip of his weapon as the metal door hissed open. He stepped into the hallway and froze. Standing in the corridor was a figure clad in dark armor, a plasma blade glowing in its hand. Ryan's eyes widened. "You've got to be kidding me." The figure's helmet tilted. A familiar, hollow voice echoed beneath the mask. "Surrender the girl." Ryan's finger tightened on the trigger. "You're going to have to kill me first." The figure's mask pulsed with red light. "That can be arranged." Ryan's eyes darkened. "Let's dance." He raised the weapon and fired. Ryan's pulse hammered in his ears as the figure in dark armor stepped toward him, the plasma blade humming dangerously in the dim corridor. The red glow of the blade cast eerie shadows on the metal walls. Ryan's grip tightened around his sidearm. The figure's helmet tilted. "You're outnumbered. Surrender." Ryan's eyes flashed with cold determination. "Not happening." The figure lunged forward, the plasma blade slicing through the air. Ryan twisted to the side, narrowly avoiding the deadly strike. His gun snapped up, and he fired 3 quick shots. The figure's armor absorbed the impact with a burst of blue sparks. "Echo!" Ryan shouted as he ducked behind a bulkhead. Echo's voice crackled through the comms. "Captain, 3 more Syndicate soldiers are breaching the aft section." Ryan gritted his teeth. "Seal off the corridor." "Negative," Echo replied. "They've bypassed the security locks." Ryan swore under his breath. He glanced back toward the med bay where Elira was still recovering. He couldn't let them reach her. The armored figure lunged again, the plasma blade carving a deep groove into the metal wall as Ryan rolled beneath it. He fired again, this time aiming for the knee joint. A shot connected. The figure stumbled, sparks spraying from the damaged joint. Ryan's advantage didn't last long. 2 more figures emerged from the corridor ahead, their plasma rifles glowing menacingly. Ryan's jaw tightened. "Damn it." The first figure recovered, its red visor flashing dangerously. "Your resistance is pointless." Ryan's breath quickened. He aimed toward the ceiling and fired. The impact sent a cascade of debris falling from the overhead panel. The armored figure raised its blade to deflect the falling debris, and that gave Ryan the opening he needed. Ryan charged. His shoulder crashed into the figure's chest, driving it back against the wall. He pressed his gun beneath the helmet and pulled the trigger. A burst of sparks erupted from the helmet's side, and the figure collapsed. Ryan didn't have time to breathe. The 2 remaining soldiers lifted their rifles. Suddenly, a blast of violet energy streaked down the corridor, striking one of the soldiers and sending him crashing into the wall. Ryan's head whipped toward the source. Elira was standing at the entrance to the med bay, her hand outstretched, violet energy glowing at her fingertips. Her eyes flashed with a dangerous light. "Stay away from him." Ryan's heart jumped. "Elira." The remaining soldier fired. Elira raised her hand, and a shimmering violet shield formed in front of her, absorbing the shot. Ryan moved fast, spinning toward the soldier and firing 3 more rounds. The shot struck the soldier's exposed shoulder joint. The alien roared and dropped to the floor. Ryan lowered his gun, his chest heaving. He turned toward Elira. "You okay?" She nodded, though her breathing was shaky. "I couldn't let them hurt you." Ryan's eyes softened. "You saved me." Echo's voice cut through the moment. "Captain, the Syndicate flagship is closing in. They are preparing to fire." Ryan's eyes darkened. "How long?" 60 seconds. Ryan cursed. "Echo, prepare the jump drive." "Negative. Their gravity well generators are locking us in place. We cannot jump." Ryan clenched his jaw. "Suggestions. Direct engagement is highly inadvisable." Ryan's gaze narrowed. "What about that maintenance shaft we saw on the schematics?" Echo hesitated. "It is approximately 5 meters from your current position. However, reaching it will require passing through 2 heavily guarded security nodes." Ryan's eyes flashed toward Elira. "Can you handle it?" Elira's hand glowed with violet energy. "I'll clear the way." Ryan smiled. "Let's go." They ran down the corridor together. The ship trembled as the Syndicate's cannons pounded the hull. Sparks rained from the ceiling. A pipe burst overhead, releasing a blast of white steam. 2 more Syndicate soldiers appeared at the end of the hall. Elira's eyes narrowed, and the air around her shimmered with violet light. A wave of energy exploded outward, slamming the soldiers against the wall. Their weapons clattered to the ground. Ryan's mouth twisted into a grin. "Not bad." Elira smirked. "Keep moving." They reached the maintenance shaft. Ryan gripped the handle and wrenched it open. "Get inside," he shouted. Elira climbed in first. Ryan followed, closing the hatch behind them. The narrow shaft led upward toward the Syndicate's command center. Ryan's arms burned as he climbed, his boots scraping against the cold metal walls. Almost there, Elira called from above. They reached the top. Ryan pushed open the exit panel and pulled himself onto the catwalk overlooking the command center. Below them, the Syndicate captain stood at the central console, its dark form surrounded by glowing control panels. "That's the gravity well generator," Elira whispered, pointing toward a tall cylindrical structure in the corner. Ryan nodded. "We blow that. We're free." Elira's gaze sharpened. "Let me handle it." Ryan's brow furrowed. "You sure?" Elira smiled faintly. "Trust me." Ryan hesitated, then handed her a small plasma charge. "Set it for a 5-second delay." Elira's fingers brushed against his. "Be careful." Ryan squeezed her hand. "You too." She slid down the catwalk and landed silently behind the generator. Her hands glowed with violet energy as she affixed the charge to the base of the structure. Ryan's gun was already up, targeting the Syndicate captain below. His finger tightened on the trigger. "Echo," he whispered. "On my mark. Drop the shields and fire thrusters at maximum burn." "Understood." Ryan's eyes narrowed. "Mark." He pulled the trigger. The shot struck the control panel. Sparks erupted. The command center filled with alarms. The captain's head snapped upward. Ryan leaped from the catwalk, landing hard. He fired again, striking the captain's shoulder. The alien stumbled back, drawing a plasma blade. Ryan's gun was out of rounds. He dropped it and drew his combat knife. The captain charged. Ryan twisted, barely dodging the blade as it sliced toward his face. His knife flashed, cutting into the captain's side. The alien roared and backhanded him, sending Ryan skidding across the floor. Elira's voice cut through the noise. "Ryan." The plasma charge beeped. 1 second left. Ryan's eyes widened. "Jump." Elira's arms wrapped around him as the charge detonated. The generator exploded in a burst of violet light. The floor buckled beneath them. The gravity field collapsed. Ryan's voice rang out. "Echo. Now." The ship's engines roared to life. The Syndicate cruiser lurched as the gravity field collapsed. Ryan's arms tightened around Elira. "Hold on." A burst of light blinded them as the ship's jump drive activated. The stars stretched into long streams of white. And then everything went dark. Ryan's breath was ragged as the ship's systems powered down. Elira's arms were still wrapped around his chest. "You okay?" Ryan whispered. Elira's eyes fluttered open. "Did we make it?" Echo's voice clicked in. Jump successful. Syndicate signal lost. Ryan sagged with relief, his forehead pressed against Elira's. We're safe. Elira's hand touched his cheek. You saved me. Again. Ryan smiled faintly. I'm not done yet. Her violet eyes shimmered. Neither am I. Ryan's hand brushed against hers. His lips parted. And then the emergency lights flickered on. Echo's voice clicked back in. Captain, I'm detecting an incoming transmission. Ryan's brow furrowed. From who? Echo's voice sharpened. The Syndicate Overmind. Ryan's jaw tightened. Patch it through. A hologram flickered to life. The figure in dark armor reappeared, its red visor glowing. You escaped, the figure said coldly. But this isn't over. Ryan's eyes darkened. No, it's just beginning. Ryan sat in the dimly lit cockpit, his eyes fixed on the stars stretching endlessly beyond the viewport. The soft hum of the ship's engines vibrated beneath his feet. His hands were still trembling from the adrenaline of the last battle. They had made it, barely, but the weight of what came next pressed heavily on his chest. Echo's voice crackled through the speakers. Captain, all systems are stable. Shields at 80%. Weapons recharging. No signs of Syndicate pursuit. Ryan exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. For now. Behind him, soft footsteps approached. He didn't need to turn to know it was Elira. The scent of her hair, the faint warmth of her presence, it was burned into his mind. She slid into the co-pilot's seat beside him, her violet eyes studying him carefully. You're tense. Ryan's mouth twitched into a faint smile. Can you blame me? Her gaze softened. We survived. Surviving isn't winning, Ryan said, his voice low. Elira's hand touched his forearm. He looked down at her slender fingers. Delicate but strong. They had seen so much pain, so much loss, and yet there was still warmth in her touch. We're alive, Ryan, she said softly. That's a victory. Ryan's hand closed over hers. He met her gaze, and for a moment, the swirling thoughts in his mind quieted. Echo's voice interrupted the moment. Captain, incoming transmission. Ryan's expression hardened. From who? The Federation command. Ryan's eyes narrowed. He glanced toward Elira, who nodded slowly. Patch it through. The hologram flickered to life in front of them. A stern-faced human admiral appeared, his uniform crisp and decorated with the insignia of the Federation's high command. His gray eyes settled on Ryan. Commander Cross, the admiral said, I see you've survived your encounter with the Syndicate. Yeah, Ryan said. Barely. And the passenger? The admiral's gaze slid toward Elira. Elira's hand tightened on Ryan's. She's with me, Ryan said evenly. The admiral's eyes darkened. The Federation Council is concerned, bringing a high-value Syndicate asset into Federation space. She's not an asset, Ryan cut him off. She's not a threat. The admiral's gaze sharpened. The Syndicate will not see it that way. You've made them bleed. They will respond. Let them, Ryan said coldly. The admiral's mouth tightened. You disobeyed direct orders, Cross. Harboring an enemy of the Syndicate could spark a war. Ryan's jaw clenched. We're already at war. The Syndicate just prefers to do it in the shadows. The admiral's gaze hardened. You may have bought yourself a temporary victory, but the Federation cannot protect you. You're on your own. Ryan's expression darkened. I wasn't counting on the Federation's help. The admiral studied him for a long moment. Then the hologram flickered and disappeared. Ryan stared at the empty space where the admiral's image had been. Elira's hand touched his cheek, drawing his gaze toward her. What now? Ryan's eyes softened as he brushed a strand of silver hair from her face. We fight back. Elira's lips curled into a faint smile. Together. Together. Echo's voice crackled. Captain, approaching vessel detected. Ryan's body tensed. Syndicate. Negative. It's civilian. No weapons. Flagged as independent trade ship. Ryan's brow furrowed. Hail them. A moment later, the screen flickered, and the image of a grizzled human pilot appeared. His scared face and worn leather jacket gave away his mercenary background. His eyes widened when he saw Ryan and Elira. Cross, the pilot said. Well, I'll be damned. Ryan's brow arched. You know me. Word travels fast. There's a bounty on your head. Syndicate's offering a fortune. Ryan's mouth twisted. And you're here to collect. The pilot laughed. Hell no, I'm here to help. Ryan's eyes narrowed. Why? The pilot's expression darkened. Because the syndicate just hit a civilian colony. Thousands dead. They're making an example of you. Ryan's jaw tightened. Bastards. The pilot leaned forward. But here's the thing. People are angry. People want to fight back. They just need someone to lead them. Ryan's gaze darkened. And you think that's me? The pilot's eyes gleamed. You're already a legend, Cross. Might as well make it official. Ryan's eyes slid toward Elira. She smiled faintly. Let's do it, she whispered. Ryan's chest tightened. He turned back toward the pilot. What's your name? The pilot grinned. Dax. Ryan's lips curled into a dangerous smile. All right, Dax. Give me the details. Dax's grin widened. Welcome to the rebellion. Ryan sat back in his chair, his fingers interlocked beneath his chin. His mind was already racing, planning the next move. The syndicate would come, but this time, Ryan wouldn't be running. He felt Elira's hand slip into his. He looked at her, and she smiled. Soft and steady. He wasn't alone anymore. Echo, Ryan said. Yes, Captain. Prepare the ship for launch. We got work to do. Echo's tone sharpened. Destination. Ryan's eyes narrowed. The syndicate's outer colony. We're taking the fight to them. Elira's hand tightened around his. Together. Ryan's eyes met hers. Together. The ship's engines roared to life. The stars outside the viewport stretched into white lines as the jump drive activated. The darkness of space swallowed them whole. But this time, Ryan wasn't afraid. For the first time in years, he had something worth fighting for, and he wasn't about to lose it. The ship emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Syndicate territory. The dark shape of the enemy station loomed ahead, surrounded by a cluster of escort ships. Echo's voice clicked in. Enemy vessels have detected us. Ryan's smile was cold. Let them. The Syndicate's ships began to maneuver toward them, weapons charging. Red warning lights flashed across the control panels. Ryan's hand hovered over the weapons controls. Elira's violet eyes flashed as energy shimmered at her fingertips. Ryan's voice was steady as he gave the order. Fire. A bright beam of light erupted from the ship's forward cannons, cutting through the darkness like a blade. The first Syndicate ship exploded in a burst of orange fire. Ryan's mouth curled into a dangerous smile. They wanted a fight, he said. Let's give them one. Elira's hand slid into his. Her eyes burned with fierce determination. The ship accelerated toward the enemy fleet. Fire and plasma erupted around them, illuminating the dark void of space. Ryan's pulse hammered. But for the first time in a long time, he wasn't running. He was fighting for something real. And this time, he wasn't going to lose.